It is a very good morning and welcome to Sly Media TV. Welcome to this episode of the program where we look at what's happening in Africa. We are going to be looking at African political challenges and reflections on Africa Day celebrations. The question is Africa Day worthy to be celebrated, commemorated? And I'm going to be assisted heavily to be dealing with these questions by Bongani Mpunga from South Africa, is a researcher, and also Lusaka, chairperson of Women's Forum, Free State, and also Kalunge from Zambia. Let me welcome all of you to the show, and my apologies for a delayed start. Let's go straight into the discussion. How are you, Joseph? Are you hearing me clearly? Joseph, can you hear me? Okay, let me start with Bongani. Bongani, can you hear me?
I'm well, perfect. How are you? Thank you for.
I'm all right, Bongani. How is it? How is South Africa?
It's a very cold morning today. Very, very cold.
Good. All right. I will start with you, Bongani, and to say that let's look at Africa as a whole, as a continent. We want to begin with the challenges politically that Africa is facing. As a researcher yourself, what would you say are the problems that we are facing as Africa politically?
Well, the one part that I would start off in Africa is that politically we are encountering a crisis of the African identity in itself. It seems that more than with the identities associated with their borders and do not give their loyalty to the broader African identity. One example is the rise of Xenophobia that we see in South Africa. This largely occurs in times of what's called economic distress. That's the one thing that we see that's happening a lot in Africa. And when you look at the side of Western Africa, we are starting to see coup d'etats come back. It was something that we thought that countries like Mali had gotten over. So it seems that as much as we had made progress in terms of dealing with military intervention in politics, that's something that seems to be coming back once again. I think I'd leave it there. I'll give other people a chance.
Okay, let me bring in Nombulelo. Welcome to the program. And there are many reasons quite a number of issues here. One of which is the xenophobic attacks that we are seeing in South Africa. And you know that we have written a paper that circulated so much on social media that was South Africa, we need to deal with the challenge of xenophobia that we are facing in South Africa. Let's start there with you. What will you say is the root cause of the attacks on national and foreign nationals in South Africa?
So just to echo some of the sentiments that Mavunja shared, sorry, good morning to everyone. Just to echo some of the sentiments that Mavunja shared, there's definitely an identity crisis and an inability for us to sort of formulate a shared African identity. It might not necessarily have to be that of the Pan-Africanist agenda, but something similar. But I think to add on to the context of South Africa is that in a lot of ways, unlike different countries in the continent, we lack a lot of the political and historical education. So we're not aware of where we come from as a country and the strides that the continent took on in order to help in the fight against apartheid and colonialism. So I think that's one of the areas where we're lacking and where people are feeling almost threatened by the emergence of what they see as outsiders, what they see as threats, especially in the backdrop of the current economic crisis that has been caused by COVID, but also that has a long-standing history.
And Joseph, welcome. Can you hear me now? Is dropped, I think. Okay. Let me come back to you, Nombelelo, to say that from the issues that you are raising, that we lack identity as Africans, how do you think we are going to be able to come out of this problem? We are going to be able to deal with this problem where we then are not going to be divided by the borders, as you say.
I think there's a lot that can be done. I definitely think traveling and being able to access different parts of the continent is part of it. So, in that sense, our leaders have a very important role to play in ensuring that we relax more of the sort of border restrictions, especially when it comes to South Africa. In a lot of cases, South Africans are easily able to leave the continent the country should they wish. But it's a different case for different African nationals trying to come in, even if it's just for a short holiday or whatever the case may be. So I think for South Africans to definitely come out of their comfort zones and start to explore the continent, but also to explore people of diversity within their own spaces. In most of our communities, there are different African immigrants from various places. So taking the time to get to understand where they come from. There's often this false notion that they're here for crime or that they're only here because their governments are corrupt. A lot of people come here because they're climate refugees, for instance. I think that's a reality that's not too far from South Africa, considering all the environmental degradation we've been seeing with the floods in KwaZulu-Natal, the drought in Cape Town, and a whole host of other issues, including even air pollution in places like Mpumalanga.
Bomani, I want to bring you in to say that let's go back to 1957 at least, where the first African country then gets independent. And we see the trust and the thinking by the fathers of Africa, Kwame Nkrumah, for instance, speaking about a united Africa. Where would you say, as a continent, we lost opportunities?
Well, we could say that we lost the opportunity first at the formation of the Organization of African Unity. That's when the Pan-African dream started to sort of defer. Because if you remember, the formation of the OAU was sort of a compromise between two groups, which was the Casablanca and the Monrovia group. The Casablanca was largely made up of leftist leaders, your Nkrumahs, your Egypt. And when you look in countries like Monrovia, it was countries like Liberia, but mainly countries that were former colonies of the French. They were not for the unity of Africa at go. However, I think that we lost the importance of uniting Africa because our leaders still do not understand that the regional blocks that we're trying to build are in some way, somehow, a barrier to political unity, because you find that to some extent these regional blocks are going to end up competing with one another. Or other countries would say, no, I do not want to unite with my neighbor because my neighbor has large problems, and as a result, if we unite, the people are going to flood on our side. However, it means that it's they're merely looking at it from an economical perspective. But if we take the approach that Nkrumah wanted to promote, that unity has to happen first at the political level, and we then use the political power or the administration of the state to then address the economic imbalances. Then we would only be able to go forward in that way, because I feel like the focus on the economic regions, of course, there are institutions that are there and we should try to use them to the best of our abilities. However, people are using the unevenness of the different countries as a way of stalling that, or as a way of stalling that unity. And this is uneven development will always happen amongst countries. Even if you look at America, there are regions that are quite developed, and there are regions that are quite uneven. But for the mere fact that there's an upper structure, political authority that is able to intervene in addressing some of the problems and negativities that come with this unevenness. It's something that is very important, and I think that is what we are lacking currently in Africa.
But do you think that the leaders that we have at the moment, are we likely going to see a return back to the thinking of the groomers of the 1950s and 60s?
Well, my brother, unfortunately, if we were to look at the leaders that we currently have at the moment, I do not think that will happen in that way. But that thrust or that push has to come from somewhere. And at this point in time, instead of Pan-Africanism only being unity of the states, I think at this point in time we have to start at unity of civil society or unity of the people, because the people are the ones at this point that have to push the African leadership in that direction, because they are not doing it. And also we could say that the African leadership is quite Pan-Africanist, in the sense that dictators are protecting one another, So they are good at doing that. You look at criminal networks, they are working beyond borders. But the one thing is that these mechanisms that are currently in place, or these kind of Pan-Africanisms that are small, that are in place, are actually working at the exclusion of the majority. So we need Pan-Africanism of the people, steered by the people, in which our governments will take the mandate from us, and not necessarily looking into only focusing on the interests of the political elite.
I see Joseph is trying to connect there. If he gets through, then I'll be able to welcome Joseph. Can you hear me? Joseph, can you hear me? Yeah, seems he has challenges with the network there. But anyway, let me come to you, Nombulelo. We talk about the challenges of xenophobia and foreign attacks. The root cause of those attacks in South Africa. We have seen a deliberate target, especially with Operation Dudula, a deliberate target on Zimbabweans. What is the issue with Zimbabweans in South Africa?
So I think a lot of it is already echoed in some of Mavundla's sentiments, but just to also take maybe a slight detour from the sort of more political discourse, I think in terms of the impacts of the colonial agenda on our sense of self as South Africans is still very much alive. In a lot of ways, colonialism started with us and it stopped with us. So compared maybe to other African states, we have a far lot more healing and learning that we need to do. I've also been finding in my own studies as an anthropology PhD student that the sort of type of migration that led to the modern day South Africa that we find today, reading historical archives about groups who at the time were just referred to as Ndus and eventually migrated, some arguing from as far up as Egypt, others arguing from sort of Western Africa, whilst others argue from around the region of Zambezi River. But even with all of these various recollections, the consensus is that there was a definite gradual migration. It depends on which era and which period you were looking at in terms of determining where this group of Ndus was at the time. And we find that gradually over time, this group of Ndus ends up in South Africa, or what we call modern day South Africa, and eventually break up into Tonga groups, break up into Xhosa groups, break up into even the Zulu groups, which are often the ones responsible for perpetuating most of the xenophobic violence. So I've been kind of thinking about it from more of like an anthropological lens, especially in relation to African spirituality and the emergence of African spirituality, particularly within South Africa. It's something that we're starting to take a lot more pride in. We're starting to explore. We're starting to consider like ancestral honoring and all of these things that in the past were criminal offenses. And I think there's a deep lack of understanding of ourselves, even in relation and in context of that history. I think even with that, there's a lot of possibly negative spiritual implications of us severing the ties that we literally had with what we now call Zimbabweans, where we ourselves are likely to have come from or broken away from that group to eventually become the Zulus that we are today, the Xhosas that we are today, the South Africans that we are today. So I think there's a lot to unpack from, again, the individual level, the healing level, in terms of the history, in terms of even the colonial history that also led to a lot of migration, even though in those instances one can argue it was forced migration. But a lot of Malawans and different Africans were brought here by the colonial government and localized to the point that they themselves, their families today might identify as South Africans, where maybe if you look back 3, 4, 5, 6 generations ago, that might not have been the case.
Something went wrong. StreamYard is off.
Can you still hear me? Hello?
I think I've lost them. I can hear them.
You can hear him.
I can hear him. Yeah, we can hear
Yes,
you.
I can also hear
Did
him.
you lose us?
I think I've lost you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, all right. Let me bring in. I don't know if Joseph is around now. Joseph, welcome. Hello, Joseph. Okay, let me say, go ahead if you can hear me, and give us your insights with regards to the challenges that we are facing politically as so just a reflection on African Day commemorations. It's gone again. Yeah, the network I think is a problem there. Oh. Joseph? All right. Unfortunately, we are having challenges to connect with Joseph there, but we'll keep on trying to connect with him. Let me go back to Bongani now. Bongani, you raised a quite interesting issue with regards to leaders in Africa now, to say that what we are seeing is that leaders are just protecting themselves, protecting one another with regards to retention of power and making sure that they keep on in those positions at the expense of the citizenry. And this has brought instability in most countries in Africa. Now, I want to find out from you as a researcher that that as it may, what do you think that we need to do as Africa to make sure we don't have a situation where we perpetuate tyranny, we don't perpetuate leaders who want to continue to suppress the citizenry?
Well, my brother, it's quite interesting because I could also take leave from what Nombulelo was saying, because we always have to start somewhere as people. First and foremost, when you look at the arts, when you look at the arts industry, your music in Africa is now also taking on the Pan-African dimension. You now able to listen to what you call Nigerian music in South Africa, and you find people enjoying it, and you find also people from different parts of Africa enjoying each other's cultures. So now, I think one element where we could start is that because music is the one thing that gets to our people quite easily. The kind of content that we take out in our music, we should also mix it with an element of conscious music. Often I tend to think that our arts as Africans tend to be too over celebratory, and we do not bring people back to the issues that affect them on a daily basis. So in terms of the arts are doing quite a good work in terms of raising this African consciousness, but we still need to add that conscious element of the struggles that our people are going through. So that would also make people to start look differently at their own governments. Secondly, we also have institutions that are doing these works. It's just that they struggle to link up their work. When institutions such as the trade union movement in Africa, well, the trade union movement is not strong across all the continent, but you look at the history of the Southern Africa, the trade union movement provides us with quite good examples of how workers can work against injustices. You look at the National Union of Mine Workers in South Africa, that does not organize mine workers on the basis of their nationality, but they organize people on the basis of their work that they do. So in mining in South Africa, you often have people from Lesotho, you have people from Swaziland, you have people from Mozambique predominantly. So you find that these institutions, trade union movements, are the ones that often speak out when members are violated, when other people are violated in other parts of Africa. So I think the arts at this point, it's a point of strength at which people could raise consciousness from. Trade union movements are also a good point of departure from which we could start. Also political parties, in as much as we do not know what the nature of this beast will be, but when we look at organizations like the Economic Freedom Fighters of South Africa, they now have branches across different countries, and it's also one way of Africans trying to coordinate the challenges that they're going through. The examples that I've given, they're not perfect, but I think that we should see them as point of departures, and we will correct their mistakes and as time goes on. But we have to start from what we have at the current moment. Thank you.
That's quite interesting. And I see Joseph is back now. Joseph, welcome once again. I would ask you, Joseph, to give us your insights with regards to the challenges that we're facing as a continent politically, and what we need to do to ensure that we come out of those challenges.
Well, thank you.
Yes,
Confirm first if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Finally.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I've been listening to the conversation. It's quite good that at least we're getting to speak up on the issue. Look, politically, in the region, in SADC in particular, and even the whole African continent, there's been a lot of issues that have been going on, particularly with the operations of the African Union. Just recently, we celebrated the Africa Day, and people are giving out a lot of speeches and statements. But if you look at it from a broader narrative, you understand that the African Union in itself as an organization has been letting down our people. Politically, I belong to the ruling party, and we just won the elections against the former ruling party, which was of Edgar Lungu. Countries within the African continent were winning and defeating a ruling party is something that is considered as a taboo. It doesn't happen frequently. And even people get declared, people that win sham elections
are congratulated by organizations such as the AU, such as SADC. And so, in as much as we celebrate these kinds of things, we must have honest conversations about how we can be able to take our continent going forward. And part of the ways that we can be able to do that is to ensure that we advocate for reforms, for electoral reforms, because when the masses of our people struggle, there are countries within the African continent, and even within SADC, where human rights violations are the order of the day. It happened in Eswatini, where just the other time, the army was deployed to brutalize their people. It happens also in Zimbabwe and across the African continent. These are issues that happen. In Cameroon as well, there's what they're fighting for now, what they're calling the Francophone and the Anglophone war, where people that speak English and people that speak French within Cameroon feel like there's a disconnect in terms of resource allocations. But these organizations have never come up to to express their views in terms of what the masses of our people face across the African continent. In Zambia, we had the same. When we were in the opposition, we were being brutalized. Our leader, my party leader, was in jail, in prison in 2017. And we never saw African Union coming out to issue a statement. We never saw SADC coming out to issue a statement against President Lungu. But because when you're a lead president and you're in leadership position, they always form these kinds of friendships and don't want to speak against each other to say, my brother, maybe we can be able to go in this direction. So they begin to now just agree with one another even when it is wrong. And so there's a very high need of political consciousness between ourselves as Africans, and that also must extend to the leaders that make these decisions, the leaders that live in our state houses and palaces. They must be able to make those tough decisions, and part of it is they must engage in tough diplomacy where they speak frankly and honestly about these issues instead of always agreeing when there are wrong things that are happening. Because the moment that we keep blind eye, the moment that we keep silent about these things, then it means we'll continue to go through the very same problem. I was hearing the issue of immigration in South Africa and all those things. South Africa has become burdened within the African continent, within SADC, because some of the countries in SADC, the leaders that we have, they are not making right decisions, and so the citizens are now going to other countries and they are burdening those people. And so South Africa has to take the burden of other countries because of the leadership failures in these countries where people come from. And so the moment that SADC as an organization has to take a stance to say we don't agree with this, we're not going to have these issues where people have to hate on each other, where South Africans and Zimbabweans, for instance, have to look at each other as enemies instead of brothers and sisters who can be able to have dialogue and engagements of how we can be able to solve the issues within the continent. And so it goes back to those issues of where presidents do not have and do not engage in that diplomacy of how we can be able to resolve our issues.
You speak about the institutions like the AU, the SADC, and all other regional bodies. And I know Bongani raised these issues earlier to say that we have a challenge with regards to those institutions. Now, do you think that we still need those institutions, or what is it that we need to do to those institutions to make sure that once again they are executing the mandate they were created for?
Well, I do think SADC and the AU needs to exist. There's a very high need for the existence to continue. But it must reform. SADC and the Organization of the African Union have been so much redundant. And very high need that our people must have faith in these organizations once more. Because at the moment, there's no faith. People don't trust SADC. People don't trust the African Union because it has a historical background of not standing on the interests of the masses of our people. It always comes out. Look, there was an election in Malawi in 2019. In that election, SADC sent observers, the African Union sent observers to go and observe that election. After the election was done, they said the election was free and fair, and the president was declared as winner, was Peter Mutharika. And then months later, they took the issue to the Constitutional Court in Malawi, and it was declared that the election was not free and fair. After SADC had already congratulated those things. And so theirs is just to protect the interests of these leaders, instead of speaking and standing on the interest masses of our people. And so it is important that we must be able to engage. And after engaging, I do believe that the African Union and SADC as an organization has got, it can reform. But at the present moment, I don't see it looking like that. I don't see it reforming in the way it is because it's got a historical backlog of supporting wrong things instead of speaking for the interest of the masses of our people. But I do think the existence and the only thing that is required is a clear reform and radical transformation of organizations.
Yes, Nombulelo, now let me bring you in to say that obviously with the picture that Joseph is painting to us of Africa and especially the citizen, African citizen, what would you say is the role that the academia should play in making sure that at least people have conscious of or are conscious of the African Africanness and the Pan-Africanism?
So I think in a lot of ways, the role that academia should play, it's arguably playing in some ways, but maybe not with the amount of effort and energy that it should. For instance, we in South Africa, and I'm sure across the continent, we saw a lot of the universities last week during Africa Week and particularly Africa Day, hosting these phenomenal events where there is diversity and there's representation of different students within the campuses, but also different African countries, their strides, their celebrations.
Oh, it seems like we have lost Nombulelo. Let me bring in Bongani now. Bongani, is Africa Day worth celebrating or commemorating with the challenges that we are facing now as a continent?
It's worth celebrating. It's worth celebrating. It's despite the problems, it's Africa Day should be that one thing that we use as a source of hope. As I said earlier, that the African Union the OAU initially was a compromise between two factions, the Casablanca and the Monrovia. Either way, we had the Organization of African Unity, and it went on to assist with the Liberation Committee in the liberation of SADC, So some work was still done. But I just want to say that it's also quite funny how we have 54 countries in this continent, but it is only 12 countries that consider Africa Day to be a public holiday. It's just a day, like in South Africa, it's not a public holiday. So it's not honored. People don't have that time to reflect. I think it's still important because it reminds us as Africans that we still have a lot of work to do, and we need to work towards achieving some of the goals and visions that the earliest Pan-Africanists had envisioned for the continent.
Joseph, there is an emergence of quite a loud voice that speaks about Pan-Africanism, that speaks about decoloniality, especially among the young population of Africa, different countries. Now, I want to find out from you what you think with regards to the issue of borders. Some people have been saying that we need to do away with the borders as Africa. Those borders were imposed by colonialists. We do not need to continue and enforce those borders. What will be your take on that?
Well, when it comes to the question of borders,
well, we need to have a honest.
Okay.
You can go ahead.
Yeah.
So must I speak?
Yes, go ahead, Bongani. Go ahead.
I think when you look at the borders at SADC, there was a free movement protocol that was adopted, that was put forward by SADC in, if I'm not mistaken, 1991, the initial one, and the hope was that once South Africa got independence, it would be adopted. But funny enough, the movement of persons protocol was rejected by South Africa, by Zimbabwe, and Botswana and Namibia, because they thought that if you let people to move around, it's going to exacerbate identity cleavages. People are going to see other people coming into their country, taking away opportunities. However, I think also because we must face the realities, the borders are not going to go at a go, but interventions must be put in place first and foremost to make it easier for people to come and go into African countries. Because if you look at certain trends of migration, of people coming into South Africa, these are not people that come to stay. It's largely people that come to get goods and go back home. So we must study the migration trends and try to come up with instruments that complement the migration trends of the people in South Africa, the people in the SADC region. So the borders eventually must go, but up until we get the political will that removes those borders, we must at least get concessions whereby no visas must be, there must be visa-free, there must be visa-free allowance for people to come, trade permits for people that come and get their stock and go sell in their own countries, and any other new mechanisms that we can come up with that complement the needs and priorities of people that need to move away from the countries but do not have as much resources like big business. Thank you.
Joseph, you want to come in there?
Of course. What I is that, in as much as these organizations exist, in as much as the borders exist, I think we must be able to have a frank conversation in terms of where we're coming from. If we can fail to run our own individual countries, if we can be able to fail to run our own individual countries, how then are we going to make a United States of Africa? These are honest conversations we must have. We're failing to run our own individual countries, and then we're dreaming of making the organization, the United States of Africa. Quite all right, we could say we're revolutionary and we want to do away with borders. But if we cannot control our own small borders, how are we going to control the entire African continent? If we could loot our own resources within these small countries, politicians could loot. Those that are in government could loot. How then are we going to run the entire African continent if we are failing to run our own individual small countries? So we must have an honest conversation first. How do we ensure that at home we're supposed to be able to invest in our schools and invest in our own public healthcare system? Take our children to school so they can graduate into economies that work and economies that develop these countries that we belong to. So if we cannot be able to do that, then there's been a collective waves of failure within the African continent, within our individual countries. And so we're dreaming about things that we cannot be able to do in a smaller. So I do think, in as much as the borders were put by the colonizers, we've been failing as Africans to solve the issues that we face in our own individual countries. So the dream of the United States of Africa and doing away with the borders is something that will just end up in a mess. If there's a mess on a smaller scale, what will happen in a broader scale?
I see the man shaking his head. Before I come to Bongani, let me
want to fight against these things of colonialism, which is a good thing, by the way. We must be able to look into ourselves. What is the track record of the that we have within the African continent? The track record is that we've been failing to resolve a whole host of issues: the education system, the healthcare system, the electoral system.
And unfortunately, I'm losing you there, Joseph. But anyway, let me come to Nombulele and say, Nombulele, from the article that you wrote, you spoke a lot about the issue of borders and how these borders were brought by colonialists. Now, what's your thoughts with regards to doing away with these borders and making sure that as Africa, we become one people, we become a united front? When, like the president was saying, that in individual countries, you find that there are leaders who will continue to suppress their citizens. Is it not then the issue that when we come together as citizens of Africa, we are able to deal with tyranny, we are able to deal with dictators?
Just before I get to that question, I want to finish my previous train of thought about the role of universities. So I was mentioning the Africa Day celebrations that happened across different universities and higher education institutions. I think that's one way that we can actually play a role in sort of demystifying some of these notions, particularly in South Africa. A lot of these celebrations were confined to the university campuses, and our communities aren't too far away. It would have been nice, for instance, to have open day where people can freely access the campus, or where we're able to set up also outside of the campus, maybe even in partnership with local government. I think that's just one small strategy. Of course, our role as researchers as well, to unpack some of the issues and the misconceptions that people have about criminality and a whole host of things. I think universities have a role to play there as well, but also even engaging with our state leaders and structures like the African Union, because of the power of most universities and the fact that leaders typically tend to listen to scholars. It's one avenue or one way that can be used to ensuring the transformation of these structures that Joseph was alluding to earlier, in ensuring that there's more youth representation in these structures, in ensuring that there's also more gender equity in these structures. So I think I see universities being important in shaping that agenda. And to get to the issue of borders, I think to disagree a little bit with Joseph, we must remember that the scramble for Africa and the drawing up of these borders was done primarily, if not solely, for resources alone. So you colonized South Africa because it was rich in gold at the time, arguably maybe in coal. And so you demarcate the area that you want as Britain. And you do the same across all the different African continents. I think if we can blur some of the borders as a start to eventually have the United States of Africa, or the African Renaissance, or that Pan-Africanist goal that so many have dreamt of before us. We need to, I think Mavundla also alluded to this, we need to start seeing ourselves beyond the political boundaries, beyond the economic divides along which our countries were drawn up under. How much value could we derive from looking at other things in terms of the benefit of uniting Africans and ensuring that the borders become blurred? And looking at, I mean, particularly with South Africa being one of the most with the highest unemployment figures in the world, yet we're one of the richest African countries. Last year, I had the pleasure of traveling to Uganda. And whilst I'm not saying that there's no challenges there, but unemployment and food insecurity aren't things that people generally worry about. Yes, there are other issues, but there's a huge culture of mobility. So if my space doesn't make it work for me, how about I move to the next area, the next country, the next community, and figuring out how I can come up with solutions. We don't have that culture as South Africans. We are a landless country, but there's no sort of interrogation even of that to say, could I move arguably to Zimbabwe and figure out ways to buy land and secure land, because that's a more easily sort of accessible opportunity in Zimbabwe than it might be in South Africa, so that I can be able to become, as an individual or within the community, more financially emancipated. What could I learn from that community as well in terms of farming, particularly because we have been so landless for so long? There's often concerns that we're unable to farm as Black South Africans. So I think there's a lot more that we can organize around, rather than working on the divides that were purely done based on resources and not our potential capabilities as Africans.
So you have the view that as Africans we must be free to move from one territory to the next. I don't want to say country because we're speaking here of blurring the borders and the borders that were brought by colonizers. That is your position and that is your view.
Yes, it is my position. I think we should be able to move freely. And once again, in most instances, South Africans can move freely. I can just decide tomorrow and to go to several African countries with just my passport alone. I don't have to apply for visas. My previous work, I used to be in the environmental justice space. And there's a lot of conversations and discussions there also about the blurring of the borders, particularly in relation to addressing some of the climate challenges, because you can't have strict climate policies in Mozambique, while, for instance, there's very flexible ones in South Africa. Obviously, the pollution doesn't know these colonial borders. It's going to travel across Mozambique regardless. So a lot of our activism and discussions around those required for us to, from time to time, have conferences in South Africa, across the continent. Many instances where just for a week-long seminar, people's visas were denied, particularly in instances when those discussions were happening in South Africa, where organizations from the respective countries, including ourselves as the host country, were able to actually produce the necessary relevant document to say, this person is not fleeing from their country, this person is not here to partake in criminality. And still we find that their visas get rejected. So it's beyond just this notion of trying to protect something or trying to ensure that we figure things out within our own borders before we move outwards. There's actually an element of hate and discrimination that's based on how these decisions get made at various levels and structures.
Well, Mary, you were shaking your head so much when Joseph was giving his submissions, especially when we were talking about the need for African countries to fix their own problems before we even talk about coming together as a United States of Africa. And we want to know what is your view with regards to that?
Well, thank you, Perfect. Now, the thing is, sometimes the approach that we fix our own problems before we unite is that there are certain problems that occur in separate countries, in different countries, that are as a result of events in another country. So, because the problems of Africa are very interrelated, trying to deal with problems as individual countries will take us forever. Whereas if we were to work collectively, because we should always try to say that, okay, of course, a problem affects a particular country, but we need to address it as a collective. And once we do that, it's where we are going to discover the linkages amongst the different problems in countries. Where do they actually come from? I mean, I'll make an example with one country, Lesotho, which is in the middle of South Africa, has a population of close to 2 million people. Large number of their workers are in South Africa, not largely because the people don't want to be there, but the territory, how it was carved out, it has disadvantaged Lesotho a lot. It's an inland country. They do not have a seaport, and a whole lot of other things cannot get to them except for when they go to South Africa. So it's a question of you saying that Lesotho has problems. What can we as SADC also, its neighbor South Africa, to say, okay, no, fine, let's deal with this problem together. Or maybe we could say South Africa has to go to a point whereby it goes into some sort of confederal arrangement with Lesotho. It's basically part of the country. It doesn't make sense why it's still alone. And it will be difficult for that country to solve some of the problems that they have with the little resources that they currently have.
back to the issue of resources that Nombulelo spoke about, that the colonizers really were looking at resources. Joseph, a direct rebuttal?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead. Do you have any reactions to the two submissions so far?
No. I was just listening to what Bongani was saying. In any case, I do believe that there's so many issues that we could collectively solve. But I'm also of the same belief that I put to say we need to resolve so many issues that go through our countries internally. And some of those issues have been happening as a result of, a clear lack of tough diplomacy among nations. We have not been tough about issues that we face, about issues of immigration, about issues of how we can be able to resolve, a whole host of, the education sector that is collapsing, the healthcare system that is collapsing. How do we resolve those issues? And I do think going forward, this idea of the United States of Africa, in as much as it's a good idea, I do think it's very important that we must be able to collectively and on a broader narrative, try to resolve the issues that we face and provide leadership on our way of, making the United States of Africa. Because look, there are countries like Uganda where there's so much dictatorship, where the president completely does not believe in the constitution. And so how do you go and convince a gentleman that he must release Uganda to join the United States of Africa and be led by somebody?
But maybe if there's more accountability, accountability, if he knows that he's not just a power in a...
Nombulelo, go ahead.
I think if there's more accountability and he knows that he isn't a singular power in and of himself, that he has to report to hierarchical structures, he might understand that constitutionalism is important.
Yes. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to Joseph, I'm going to read a few questions and comments from our listeners and our viewers. Some of the questions are directed at you, our panelists. The first one I have here is directed at Joseph, and it says that we want to know what is the sorry, it's running away. Okay, we want to know that from Joseph, what is his position with regards to Pan-Africanism? For we understand that they, as a country, have allowed the United States of America to set up a military establishment in their country. What is his position with regards to Pan-Africanism?
Well, there's been a very misdirected and misconceived and wrong narrative that has been spread that the United States of Africa, rather the United States of America, has set up a military base in Zambia. That is wrong.
What has been said?
That has been said by the United States. There's been a lot of narrative that has been spread across the African continent to say there's a U.S. military base that has been opened in Zambia, and that narrative has been driven by so many leaders within Africa. Some of them belong to ruling parties in Africa. They've been saying, no, Zambia is going to bed with the devil. But look, as a country, Zambia, we've never sold out the African continent. We're a country of founder. In the 90s, in 1968, we set up what was called the Lusaka Manifesto. In the Lusaka Manifesto, we laid out a clear roadmap of how we wanted Africa to be independent. Nelson Mandela, when he was released from jail in 1990, the first country that he visited was Zambia. We made Lusaka the training ground for liberation struggle icon, the ANC, Jacob Zuma, and the leaders from the ANC, Thabo Mbeki, they were here in Lusaka, O.R. Tambo, they lived in our Lusaka townships, and they set up camp here and spoke our languages, and so we've never sold out. When we see I think there's a military base, it's just a wrong narrative.
what people are saying here is that from what you are just telling us, is that not a betrayal of the spirit of Africa, a betrayal of the spirit of SADC, when you then allow colonizers or former colonizers to come in a country and set up a military something? You are not calling it a base. I don't know what agreement you are having with that African. Is it not a betrayal of the African spirit?
Well, we were not betrayed, like I said.
Okay.
Say clear on us. So the Zambia must move forward. Our people elected my party into position, into a position that we defeated the people. And we've never betrayed anyone. There's no military base that has been set up in Zambia. And so this narrative that is being driven, even the other day, I was on Twitter, I was saying the US commanders, they went to meet the president of Rwanda, President Kagame. But there's not been any backlash whatsoever about that meeting. When they met our president in Zambia, when they met my party in Zambia, those people were saying all sorts of things. And they were making false statements to say Zambia has allowed the US to set up a military base. You can go in and out across the stretches of our country. You will not find any US military base. There's no such a thing. And we've never sold out. We have never, and we will never sell out the African continent. We'll continue to ensure that we fight and that Zambia is delivered safely. Our country, its economy and its social welfare is delivered safely to the next generation of Zambian leaders. And we'll continue to fight for that.
Okay, thank you so much. Since we are almost coming to the end of the program, let me allow Bongani to give us your parting shots with regards to the issue at hand, the challenges that we're facing as Africa, and what we need to do to make sure that we deal with these challenges. What will be your last word to our viewers?
My words would be that it's important that we never stop spreading the message that Africa must unite. But it is also important that we do not start from where we want Africa to be. We have to start from where we are, and we have to work with what we have currently and build on the instruments that we have while correcting their deficiencies. That's all I can say.
Nombulelo?
I think for me personally, and hopefully this is something that would be useful to other people, African spirituality has been a good place for me to look at as a researcher, but also as an individual as well. I think in a lot of ways, our ancestors are fighting to push us back together again. And when we resist that move, we actually disconnect ourselves even from our ancestors and the spirituality that we care about. So Africa needs to unite.
Africa needs to unite. Joseph, your last word?
Of course, I share the same sentiments that Africa needs to unite. But in as much as we need to unite, I think it is important that we must also have honest conversations about taking diplomatic stances. And part of that is being honest with each other about the dictatorial tendencies that happen within the African continent. We're not going to resolve those issues if we are scared to engage, and if leaders are not honest enough about the issues that we face, and to say that we must only extend our hands of friendship to those that believe in human rights. And so I do believe that Africa must unite, but in as much as it should unite, we must also engage in tough diplomacy in terms of how we want to take the continent going forward.
Let me take this opportunity to say thank you so much to the three panelists I had on the show. Thank you to Bongani Mavunja from South Africa. Thank you to Nombule Loshange from South Africa as well, and Joseph Kalingwe from Zambia. We are going to continue to have such discussions where we're looking at Africa and to say what is it that we need to do as a continent, as a people in Africa, to make sure that first we unite, to make sure that we make our politics work, we make our economies work. So without engaging, without these discussions, without the discourse around these issues, we may not be able to do so. I thank you, and thank you to our viewers. My name is Perfect Shomwane, and you were watching Sly Media TV. We meet again on other programs. Have a good day.
I've been trying